My administration has taken action to abolish all discriminatory diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. And these are policies that were absolute nonsense throughout the government and the private sector. With the recent yet somewhat unexpected great Supreme Court decision just made, America will once again become a merit-based country.
A merit-based country. Right. On his first day back in the Oval Office, Donald Trump signed an executive order ending what he called, quote, radical and wasteful diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in federal agencies. It's unclear how many workers ultimately will be affected, but what is evident is the impact this will have on the government and the country. Trump's actions echo President Woodrow Wilson's then unprecedented segregation of federal offices in 1913. There was no official law, no executive order, just guiding policy. But that policy led to blacks being segregated or just summarily dismissed from federal positions nationwide. For example, in 1914, Wilson required a photo from all federal job applicants to make it easier for racial screening. And those black workers who managed to keep their jobs, they were often subjected to inhumane and degrading treatment. In an open letter to Wilson, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, quote, "We are told that one colored clerk who could not actually be segregated on account of the nature of his work has consequently had a cage built around him to separate him from his white companions of many years." Take a second to let that sink in. A cage. Wilson later defending his racist policies to a group of black professionals, saying in part, quote, "Segregation is not humiliating, but a benefit and ought to be so regarded by you gentlemen." In 1948, President Harry Truman signed an executive order banning segregation in federal civil service, but the damage was already done, and it continues to this day. While more than 18% of federal workers are black, they only comprise 11.7% of management positions, with white employees being twice as likely to be promoted to management in some agencies. The wealth gap between federal black and white workers sits at 15.6%. And as late as February of 2023, about 4 in 10 federal black workers say that they've experienced discrimination or have been treated unfairly at work because of their race or ethnicity. Joining me now is Shaun Harper, professor of public policy, business, and education at the University of Southern California and founder and chief research scientist of the USC Race and Equity Center. Professor, it's an honor to have you here. Look, DEI efforts, they date back to the civil rights movement to create more diverse and inclusive workplaces because of the racist history of this country. And just like in Woodrow Wilson's time, what happens in that federal government is often repeated in the private sector. We've seen recently companies like Target, McDonald's, Walmart, Meta, and others, they're rolling back their DEI initiatives. How much do you think that these collective moves, either publicly in our government sector and privately in our business sector, they're going to set the nation back?
Yeah, well, Katie, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you. I also want to appreciate the historical journey that you just took us through. Historical facts matter. It's why it is so important to teach the full truths about America's racial past and present. You know, if people were taught the real truth, they would understand the consequential nature of the policy decisions that are being made right now that are going to lead to catastrophic outcomes and even more pronounced racial inequities and wealth gaps between groups. You know, this is bad for our economy. Equity is good for our economy. When women receive equal pay for equal work, that is good for women and it's good for all of us in the United States. It's good for us when the diversity of our federal leadership and leadership in our military is reflective of the diversity of our nation. So, you know, that's what's at stake here now because of these new executive orders from President Trump.
And Trump's efforts go beyond DEI. On Tuesday, he revoked the Equal Employment Opportunity Rule that was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965, which stipulates that employers can't discriminate against job applicants or workers on the basis of race, gender, and other protected characteristics. This is a policy that was paid for in blood by the civil rights movement. And in 2023, white people still the majority of federal workers at 59.5%, and men are still outnumbering women 55% to 45%. 74% of senior executive level positions held by white workers. Reversing these initiatives could lead to a huge backslide on progress. But isn't this just the most blatant permission to be able to discriminate?
It sure is. I appreciate that you just laid out those facts, right? Like what you just presented is evidence. And there's a corpus of evidence that's been produced by really credible researchers that show durable and persistent patterns of inequity and discrimination. We're going to see more of that, and it's going to cost the federal government and it's going to cost the private sector. What I mean by that is, as diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are rolled back, we're going to see, unfortunately, higher rates of discrimination, harassment, and abuse in the workplace. And people are going to sue their employers, as they should, for those experiences. That's going to cost us a ton of money that, ultimately could have been saved had we, in fact, continue to invest in the really good protective DEI initiatives.
Professor Shaun Harper, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your insight and your analysis.